no comment, especially the two men in the back of the room. You realize I'm speaking to women, so anyway. So they come up with a plan to get him a new wife. The plan was that they were going to go find the most beautiful virgins in the empire. And they would all be brought to the palace. And for a year, they had ladies' maids that were waiting on them and giving them beauty treatments. And they had people who were advising them about being in the royal palace. And they had this whole year to prepare for what was going to happen next. Well, I want to point out that they had no choice. They were picked for their outward beauty. Nothing was known about what they were in their hearts. But now we see Mordecai enter the picture. And the reason we do is because Esther, his niece, of whom he was the guardian, was picked to be a member of this harem. So let's think for a minute, just in passing. She's not an Assyrian. Kind of maybe makes the idea of her becoming queen a little questionable, but she's not. She is a Jew. She is one of the captives, but she was chosen and she was there. And so she and Mordecai decide together that she will not let anyone know, for her safety, that she is a Jew. Hold on to that too. What we also know from the Bible is that she found favor with all the other women, with the eunuchs that were in charge of this harem. What we know from that is her demeanor. Her heart was such that people liked her. So we can know that about her character. We'll find out a little bit more here in just a minute. Okay. The Bible is very clear that after the year, when the women started to move to that next step, that they would each see the king one at a time. In the evening, the Bible says they would go in. In the morning, they would come out. We can assume many things from that. When they came out, they went to a different harem under a different eunuch and would not see the king again unless he called them by name because they had found his favor. So that's how this was going to work. When it was time for each girl to go in, they were allowed to take anything that they wanted with them. When it was Esther's turn, she turned to the eunuch in charge and asked him what would he advise, and she chose to take only what he advised her to take. I think that tells us another characteristic of Esther. I think that shows some wisdom, some intelligence. So we're putting a picture together of who this Esther is. She goes in to see the king for her turn, and she found favor with the king. And the Bible tells us she pleased the king and won his favor, and he loved her more than all the women. And she became the queen. Now remember, he does not know she's a Jew. So let's just put some questions around this. Did God have a hand in Esther being chosen to be a part of a harem? Did God have a role in Esther having to perform her duties with the king in this process? Did he help her to find favor with the ladies and the eunuchs? Did he help her to find favor with the king? Was this a good thing that happened to her, or was it a despicable thing that happened to her? Was God in control, or did he just not intervene? Well, we're going to look a little further. There's another important event that's about to occur. Mordecai, even though he was a Jew, had a pretty decent position that put him at the gate, maybe to do business, because that's where a lot of business was there's another vocabulary word that's just not going to come. That occurs. Business happens around the palace gates. And so he's there one day. and he hears some of the eunuchs plotting to lay hands on the king, like a coup, an overthrow. And he manages to get word of that to the queen, who passes it on to the king and says, my cousin Mordecai heard these eunuchs, and they were captured and they were hung, and the event was written in the chronicles of the king. End of story. Or not. Was God in control of this event? Did God place Mordecai in this position of opportunity? Did he make it possible for Mordecai to get that information to Esther? Did he make it possible for Esther to get it to the king? Is this even an important event in the life of the Jews? Or not? Well, we have one more character in this saga, and his name is Haman. He is the top advisor to the king, kind of like the prime minister. And he's been advanced by the king to be over all the other advisors and all of the servants, and they are to bow to him. So all the king's horses and all the king's men bow to Haman. But when Haman would pass through the gates towards the palace, Mordecai didn't bow. And of course this made Haman angry. And in fact, the other people were wondering, is he going to get away with this? But they noticed, but it reminds me of another story. Can you think of a time in the book of Daniel when somebody refused to bow to the image of the king and was going to be thrown in the lion's den because of it? Or maybe his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who would not obey the commands of the king, and their sentence was to be thrown into the fiery furnace. I can't help but ask, how many times have Christians courageously chosen not to bow to someone or thing other than God? And how many times did God save them for their obedience? And how many times did he not? Could he have intervened if he wanted to? Is he sometimes in control and sometimes not? Can we trust him? There's just a little bit more to this story, but before I go there, we're going to take one of 3 breaks. Now, I know all of you don't need to break every single time to go to the restroom, but you may need to stretch and whatever, and we do have water and some snacks back at the kitchen area, I think. But here's what we're going to do during breaks. You know, normally in a retreat, we probably would talk around the table and have a discussion. But we can't do that today. So I put a handout together for you. You may have looked at it. There's some questions there for you to think about during each section. Just to help you, you know, we have visual learners, audio learners, and tactile learners. Well, this hopefully will help hit every single one of you. But just questions like, what is your biggest takeaway from this session? How might you live differently because of what you learned from this session? But every time there's going to be a specific question. And what I want from you is to just pray and ponder. Break if you need. Remember, we have to maintain our social distancing. Break at different times. Don't everybody go at once. If you don't have to go immediately, let somebody else go later. When you hear the music going again, that's when we'll start back up again. But here's what I want you to pray about and think about and ponder. What has been your biggest struggle in 2020? Think of one. You may have 10. Pick one. How have you seen God's hand in your struggle? Now, when we come back, Donna and Karen are going to have mics, and they're going to float around, and we're going to, depending on our time, we're going to let 2 or 3 or 4 share if you want to. Not going to force anybody. But I want you to pray about it, I want you to ponder it, write it down, and we'll come back in several minutes. You'll have plenty of time. Break when everybody's not breaking and filter back in, and we'll see you again in a few minutes.